So I'm reading Roald Dahl by the Witches. So if you happen to not have a book at home, or if you really just want to listen to me and my lovely hat, I thought I could share this with you. So I thought I would travel a little bit in my own mind and pretend I was being one of the characters. Just like we always talk about the fact that when you read a book, it's like traveling somewhere. So we're going to travel together to this book, into this book. I'm going to set my timer for 15 minutes so that I know that I've kept up with that. And it's going to probably cut in the middle of something. But if you stay tuned, you can hear the next, what's coming down. So hold on. Here I go. A note about witches. In fairy tales, witches always wear silly black hats and black cloaks. And they ride on broomsticks. But this is not a fairy tale. This is about real witches. The most important thing you should know about real witches is this. Listen very carefully. Never forget what is coming next. Real witches dress in ordinary clothes and look very much like ordinary women. They live in ordinary houses and they work in ordinary jobs. That is why they are so hard to catch. A real witch hates children with a red-hot, sizzling hatred that is more sizzling and red-hot than any hatred you could possibly imagine. A real witch spends all her time plotting to get rid of the children in her particular territory. Her passion is to do away with them, one by one. It is all she thinks about the whole day long, even if she is working as a cashier in a supermarket, or typing letters for a businessman, or driving around in a fancy car. And she could be doing any of these things. Her mind will always be plotting and scheming and churning and burning and whizzing and fizzing and with murderous, bloodthirsty thoughts. Which child, she says to herself all day long, exactly which child shall I choose for my next squelching? A real witch gets the same pleasure from squelching a child as you get from eating a plateful of strawberries and thick cream. She reckons on doing away with one child at a week. Anything less than that, and she becomes grumpy. One child a week is 52 a year. Squish them and squiggle them and make them disappear. This is the motto of all witches. Very carefully a victim is chosen, then the witch stalks the wretched child like a hunter stalking a little bird in the forest. She treads softly. She moves quietly. She gets closer and closer. Then, at last, when everything is ready, and she swoops. Sparks fly, flames leap, oil boils, rats howl, skin shrivels, and the child disappears. I don't know if you can see that. That's the picture. See if you can spot the witch. A witch, you must understand, does not knock children on the head or stick knives into them or shoot them with a pistol. People who do those things get caught by the police. A witch never gets caught. Don't forget that she has magic in her fingers and delivery dances in her blood. Devilery dances in her blood. She can make stones jump about like frogs, and she can make tongues of flames go flickering across the surface of the water. These magic powers are very frightening. Luckily, these are not a great number of real witches in the world today, but there are still quite enough to make you nervous. In England, there are probably about 100 of them altogether. Some countries have more, others have not quite so many. No country in the world is completely free from witches. A witch is always a woman. I do not wish to speak badly of women. Most women are lovely, but the fact remains that all witches are women. There is no such thing as a male witch. On the other hand, a ghoul is always a male. So indeed is a Barghest. Both are dangerous, but neither of them is half as dangerous as a real witch. As far as children are concerned, a real witch is easily the most dangerous of all, the living creature on earth. What makes her doubly dangerous is the fact that she doesn't look dangerous. Even when you know all the secrets, you will hear about those in a minute, you can still never be quite sure whether it is a witch you are gazing at or just a kind lady. If a tiger were able to make himself look like a large dog with a waggy tail, you would probably go up and pat him on the head, and there you would be, the end of you. It is the same with witches. They all look nice, like nice ladies. Kindly examine the picture opposite. Which lady is the witch? This is a difficult question, but it is one that every child must answer. For all you know, a witch might be living next door to you right now, or she might be the woman with the bright eyes who sat opposite you on the bus this morning. She might be the lady with the dazzling smile who offered you a sweet from a white paper bag in the street before lunch. She might even, and this will make you jump, she might even be your lovely school teacher who is reading these words to you at this very moment. Look carefully at that teacher. Perhaps she is smiling at the absurdity of such a suggestion. Don't let that put you off. It might be part of her cleverness. I am not, of course, telling you for 1 second that your teacher is actually a witch. All I'm saying is that she might be one. It is most unlikely, but, and here comes the big but, it is not impossible. Oh, if only there were a way of telling for sure whether a woman was a witch or not. Then we could come round them all up and put them in the meat grinder. Unhappily, there is no such way, but there are a number of little signals that you can look for, like quirky habits that all witches have in common. And if you know about these, if you remember them always, then you might just possibly manage to escape from being squelched before you are very much older. Chapter 2, My Grandmother. I myself had 2 separate encounters with witches before I was 8 years old. From the first, I escaped unharmed, but on the second occasion, I was not so lucky. Things happened to me that will probably make you scream when you read about them. That can't be helped. The truth must be told. The fact that I am still here and able to speak to you, however peculiar I may look, is due entirely to my wonderful grandmother. My grandmother was Norwegian. The Norwegians know all about witches. The Norwegians know all about witches, for Norway, with its black forests and icy mountains, is where the first witches came from. Oh my goodness. My father and my mother were also Norwegian. And because my father had a business in England, I had been born there and had lived there and had started going to an English school. Twice a year, at Christmas and in the summer, we went back to Norway to visit my grandmother. This old lady, as far as I could gather, was just about the only surviving relative we had on either side of my family. She was my mother's mother, and I absolutely adored her. When she and I were together, we spoke either in Norwegian or in English. It didn't matter which. We were equally fluent in both languages. And I have to admit that I felt closer to her than to my mother. Soon after my 7th birthday, my parents took me, as usual, to spend Christmas with my grandmother in Norway. And it was over there, while my father and mother and I were driving in the icy weather just north of Oslo, that our car skidded off the road and went tumbling down into a rocky ravine. My parents were killed. I was firmly strapped to the back seat and received only a cut on the forehead. I won't go into the horrors of that terrible afternoon. I still get the shivers when I think about it. I finished up, of course, back in my grandmother's house with her arms around me tight, and both of us crying the whole night long. What are we going to do now? I asked her through the tears. You will stay here with me, she said, and I will look after you. Aren't I going back to England? Oh, no, I would never do that. Heaven shall take my soul, but Norway shall keep my bones. The very next day, in order that we might both try to forget our great sadness, my grandmother started telling me stories. She was a wonderful storyteller, and I was enthralled by everything she told me, but I didn't become really excited until she got to the subject of witches. She made it clear to me that her witch stories, unlike most of the others, were not imaginary tales. They were all true. They were the gospel truth. They were history. Everything she was telling me about witches had actually happened, and I had better believe it. What was far, far worse, was that witches were still with us. They were all around us, and I had better believe that, too. Are you really being truthful, Grandmama? Really? And truly truthful? My darling, she said, you won't last long in this world if you don't know how to spot a witch when you see one. But you told me that witches took like ordinary women, Grandmama. So how can I spot them? You must listen to me, my Grandmama said. You must remember everything that I tell you. After that, all you can do is cross your heart and pray to heavens and hope for the best. We were in the big living room of her house in Oslo, and I was ready for bed. The curtains were never drawn in the house, pulled shut, and though the windows I could see the huge snowflakes and falling slowly onto the outside world, and that was as black as tar. My grandmother was tremendously old and wrinkled, with a massively wide body which was smothered in gray lace. She sat there majestic in her armchair, filling every inch of it. Not even a mouse could have squeezed in to sit beside her. I myself, just 7 years old, was crouched on the floor at her feet, wearing pajamas, dressing gowns, and slippers. You swear you aren't pulling my leg, I kept saying to her. You swear you aren't just pretending? Listen, she said. I have known no less than 5 children who have seemingly vanished off the face of the earth, never to be seen again. The witches took them. I still think you are trying to frighten me, I said. I'm just trying to make sure that you don't go the same way, she said. I love you and I want you to stay with me. Tell me about the children who disappeared, I said. My grandmother was the only grandmother I ever met who smoked cigars. She lit one now. A long black cigar that smelt of burning rubber. The first child I knew who disappeared, she said, was called Ragnhild Hansen. Ragnhild was about 8 at the time. And she was playing with her little sister on the lawn. Their mother, who was baking bread in the kitchen, came outside for a breath of air. Where's Ragnhild? She asked. She went away with the tall lady, the little sister said. What tall lady? Said her mother. The tall lady in white gloves, the little sister said, and she took Ragnhild by the hand and led her away. No one, my grandmother said, ever saw Ragnhild again. Didn't they search for her? Oh, they searched for miles around. Everyone in town helped, but they never found her. What happened to the other 4 children? I said. They vanished just as Ragnhild did. How, Grandma? How, Grandmama? How did they vanish? In every case, a strange lady was seen outside the house just before it happened. But how did they vanish? I asked. The second one was very peculiar, my grandmama said. There was a family called Christensen. They lived up in Holkenkollen, and they had an old oil painting in the living room, which they were very, very proud of. The painting showed some of the ducks in the yard outside a farmhouse. There were no people in this painting, just a flock of ducks on a grassy farmyard and a farmhouse in the background. Here's a picture of Grandmama. It was a large painting and rather pretty. Well, one day, their daughter Solveig came home from school eating an apple. She said a nice lady had given it to her on the street. The next morning, little Solveig was not in her bed. The parents searching everywhere, but they couldn't find her. Then, all of a sudden, her father shouted, "There she is! That's Solveig feeding the ducks!" He was pointing at an oil painting, and sure enough, there she is. That's Solveig feeding the ducks. And now we're going to have to take a breather because that was my 15 minutes. I'll see you in a bit. Page 18. See what happens.